Thanks for joining us tonight. My name's Steve Sabia. I am an officer with the local IEEE Palouse chapter or section. I would encourage you, if you're not an IEEE member, to reach out to any one of us. I see quite a few names on here, but if you know Pavan or Brian Johnson or myself, you can also go to our IEEE Palouse website, which you can Google. I don't have that URL right in front of me right now. That said, we are really lucky to have our presenter tonight, and I'm honored to be able to introduce him. Dwight and I actually have worked in the past on SEL projects, and it's just a pleasure to work with him. Aside from being a great guy, he also has an extraordinary background in that and I'm going to read this from from his bio that was with the flyer. But Dwight got his BS in electrical engineering from Stevens Institute of Technology, and now he's with Cyber Services Engineering Manager at SEL. Actually, it's if I'm not mistaken, Cyber Services Manager for SEL Infrastructure Defense. And is that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And prior to working for SEL, he worked at Hewlett Packard and Agilent as an aerospace and defense business development manager and also a systems engineer. He was working on projects from electronic warfare to SCADA systems. He's a licensed professional engineer in Texas with the global, and also has a Global Security Essentials certificate, and is a certified information security professional. Dwight's favorite hobbies are extra class ham radio, as well as fly fishing in the great Pacific Northwest. So without further ado, Dwight, it's all yours.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. Just let me make sure I know how to advance the computer here. Hey, you brought up an interesting thing, Steve, and that is my first IEEE meeting that I went to when I was at Stevens in college. And for those who are joining here, who are maybe considering joining the IEEE or have joined, one of the first meetings I attended was a gentleman who came up from Bell Labs in New Jersey and was describing the new patent he received regarding handoff of radio communications that would be known, and he named it as a cell. And so we get our cell phone technology. So one of the first people I ever met and got a chance to shake hands with was one of the inventors for the cell phone, which to me just speaks volumes of the IEEE and how valuable of an organization it is. So thank you for inviting me. And I hope to do some justice in terms of this meeting. So with respect to cybersecurity, if you haven't read the recent headlines, Biden, the most recent ones in April 20th, a couple of weeks ago, Biden said he's taking bold action to protect the electric grid. And then the Department of Energy also kicked off a 100-day plan to address cybersecurity risks. When they came out with that, I really started thinking, what could really be done in 100 days? And given the amount of experience I've had with the electric utilities with SEL for the past 16, 17 years, I've come up with some ideas, but I want to share with the group here that these are just ideas that I've taken and said, I think these can be done. So I want to share those. With respect to implementing security in a substation or even any critical infrastructure environment, you really have to consider the implications of safety. That is, if we were to, or if I'm in my 100-day plan going to implement something, I've got to assure that the public is safe. And by the way, that's an important function for a professional engineering license, is that you are basically signing off as a professional engineer that you are maintaining the safety of the public at large. So that's critical. I can't just layer in some arbitrary cybersecurity measures without considering safety. With respect to that and to the utilities in almost any critical infrastructure is the availability of the information and the systems that are operating and protecting the infrastructure. The other principles that we see later or across going clockwise is it needs to be simple and no simpler. It needs to achieve the purpose for which it was designed. There needs to be certainty in terms of its operation. That is, it constantly needs to be operating and it needs to be within reasonable cost. I'm just saying that these, in terms of the 100-day items I'm going to share tonight, and we've shared with other customers and have implemented, these are some guiding principles. And these should be guiding principles in general, if you ask me, for any engineer wanting to practice the art of engineering. With respect to power systems in general, communications have to operate within the time frame that the power system needs to protect itself. What do I mean by that? Basically, if a lightning strike hits the power system is reacting in a high-speed exchange of information to decide what it should do in terms of isolating that event. It could be a lightning strike. It could be also a critter, a squirrel running across the line, or it could be the wind taking down a line or a car accident. But those communications that happen for the devices that are protecting the power infrastructure, basically smart circuit breakers, if you will, are operating at a very high speed. And so my point on this, and again, in terms of another value item or requirement, is that the security that you're going to layer in, or the things I'm going to suggest, should not negatively impact the communications of the protection system. So maintaining the stability and the utility of the electric power system is critical. And you just can't do things haphazardly. Now I'm going to move finally into some of the things we're interested in looking at, and that is what the talk is based on. That is, if I were to try to attack a system, where could the potential attacks of a power system occur? And in looking at it over the past 7 years or so, these are the areas that people have attempted to attack the grid. And it goes from, they have tried it from the internet, they've tried it from the office network with phishing. I've seen people using USB keys or attempt to use USB keys to infect systems. We know from Natanz and over in the Ukraine, as well as the water system in Florida, that these attacks have been escalating and they've been getting smarter in terms of the attackers. So I'm going to speak to some of those, but what I'm trying to impress upon you is that a lot of the infrastructure, the defense in depth that we're trying to approach in terms of securing the infrastructure, have places where people can actually attack and gain access into it. And I'm hoping that, well, I'm not hoping, I'm suggesting that this 100-day plan is a way to sort of address some of these issues at all these different layers or levels. One of the things for this 100-day plan I'm suggesting, and I'm not saying Biden has taken my advice or nor has the DOE, but frankly speaking, I think they're going to arrive at using the NIST Cybersecurity Framework because it's a good framework. It's a framework that says, hey, there are 5 pillars on which to build the security of a system. Those pillars are identified as identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So my 100-day plan, I'm breaking down into 20-day segments. And those 20-day segments cover the identify 25 days, protect 20 days, detect, respond, recover. Each of those segments taking, I'm going to suggest 20 days, and then decide within those segments or within those pillars, what are some of the things we can do? And I'm going to share that. I want to also emphasize that when I share these things, we've done these things. So it's not something that's theoretical. We've actually practiced it and are implementing it. Okay, days 1 through 20. I've got my challenge from the DOE. I've got the challenge from the president himself. And I'm saying to myself, okay, in the identify pillar, what are the things I might be able to do in 20 days? So I'm going to go through some of these examples here, but basically there's some very important things that need to happen, and I'm sharing those here. Namely, we need to understand what we have out there. We need to understand what the risks are associated with what we have. I also speak to the policy plans and procedures, and then training. And I'll go into some of these in more detail. With respect to system baseline, this is an example on the left side of your screen showing a topology of a larger network. But what's really important is when someone says a system baseline, they often think from an IT perspective, what are the email servers and what are the devices to generate text messages and things like that, or the web server. But we also need to do the baseline. That is, when I say baseline, what do I even mean? Well, I need to know the devices. What is the supplier? Who is the manufacturer? What is the firmware version? Where are they physically even located? What looks to be the communication architecture or network topology? And then on each of those devices, are there any security notifications for each of these? Now, depending upon the size of the utility, you may not be able to get this done in 20 days, but this is probably the most critical thing to do for utilities. Now, I got to share with you, I've visited probably close to 1,000 utilities in the 16 years or more working for SEL, and they don't all have all this information available. One of the real challenges facing the utilities is they are very resource constrained. And documenting the devices, the firmware versions, where are these devices located, along with drawing the network topology for some of the smaller utilities is very challenging. Some of the larger utilities is also challenging as well. So I'm just saying, taking 20 days maybe to say, let's start on a system baseline and documenting what we have could be a really good first step, and would probably be my first recommendation as to what to do. Now, going beyond that, I just wanted to say that it also is even important in terms of the law. NERC CIP, Critical Infrastructure Protection, is what CIP stands for, CIP. Basically is a law for utilities that is if they will be fined if they do not follow the law. Most recently, they were talking about what's called low impact. That is some of the distribution systems. When I say distribution, if you're not familiar, it's the lower voltage systems. And this includes microgrids as well. Those microgrids that may be attached to a utility are going to have to start following us. But my point here is that even in the CIP low impact, you really need to understand what you have out there. So the first 20 days, if it were me, I would say I'm going to make sure that I have a system baseline. We do provide system baselines, and I just wanted to show you what an example report would look like or could look like in terms of doing a system baseline, where we go out and we say, okay, we're going to see what the customers have out there. I document it in this type of report format. And then I also, from that, decide or give them a risk associated with those devices. So I'm just saying, just in general, for the first 20 days, these are the things that are legally binding for US utilities, and that includes Canada now as well. So understanding what you have out there and understanding what systems need to be patched is really important. So I'm going to say, okay, for the first 20 days, what I want to suggest has to happen, a system baseline. Now, the next step, or the next pillar in the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, and I'm going to say the next 20 days, so days 21 through 40, what could I possibly do? Now, this is a bit more challenging because this may take some time to implement, but there's some things I think you could do, or a utility could do. That is, do they have anti-malware operating on their computer systems? Is it updated? Are they implementing things such as centralized access controls? Fundamentally, if I have said in the protect section, what am I talking about? I'm talking about an overview of how is my data security operating? Do I have a good information protection process? Am I implementing some protective technologies? Now, I got to share with you, I went to one customer and we were talking about centralized access controls and password management on the devices, such as the SEL relays. And I was saying, you know, you really, and I was really focused on sharing with him and trying to convince him that the centralized access controls was really important. Secure remote access was control. And the gentleman said to me, Dwight, I need to talk to you a second. I said, what's going on? He says, we don't have good physical security. I have no idea who has keys into our substations. And I need to focus on that first. So the reason I have physical security listed on the right-hand side is I'm assuming that's taken care of. But if it is not, then that needs to be addressed in terms of the next 20 days. Now, you probably won't be able to do all the security measures in 20 days, but what I would suggest, if you don't have good physical security, such as just physical key management, or the fences aren't very good, I would suggest you write a plan up in those 20 days and say, what is going to be my physical security plan to get us to a place where we actually know where the keys are, where are the locks, and that we have good physical security with respect to people getting into and out of our substations. So I'm just suggesting, I do have the cyber aspect, and I'm saying maybe in the 20 days, do a inventory of what you have, anti-malware, do some computer imaging, but it's really predicated on, do I have good physical security measures in place? And that's my suggestion for this. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit more on the security hardening guidelines. With respect to the VPN and IPsec, in fact, I just saw an FBI notice come out today speaking about a compromise of remote desktop protocols and VPN IPsec access. So this is something that could be implemented. That is, and here's my reasoning for that. I was at a utility in the north that said, we have our Cisco firewalls, we have firewalls at our substations, but they didn't implement a VPN IPsec tunnel. I think they thought they did, but they didn't have it operational. So one of the things we did is we went in there and verified whether it was operational or not, and then suggested to them, because it was not operational, we suggested to them, why don't you let us come in, make some of these configuration changes. And within a week, we were able to get one of their substations working with a VPN IPsec tunnel to at least guarantee that the data that was traversing that tunnel was encrypted and authenticated. So it is something you could do in 20 days, probably not on all the substations, but you certainly could start implementing, and especially if you already have the infrastructure in place. But the other thing to verify is, do you have it set up correctly? So I know VPN IPsec tunnels help you maintain data confidentiality and integrity through hashes and encryption, but it's really important to know, did you set it up correctly? One of the bigger mistakes that I've seen is that the VPN tunnel is not set up appropriately or correctly. And the same is true for the remote desktop. So I would just suggest that one of the things to do in the second 20 days for this particular item is to say, have I set up these tunnels correctly, and verify that. That can easily be done. Centralized access control is much more difficult to implement in 20 days, but you could say, hey, I'm going to put a plan in place. So you could take 20 days and say, you know what, we may not get this done in the 100 days, but we certainly can set up a plan where we're going to try to pilot or do a pilot of a system where I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to put in a proxy server between the relay and the engineer or an engineering access. And if an engineer remotely comes in through that VPN IPsec tunnel, says, hey, that proxy server says, does this person have the correct credentials to access this relay or not? If they do not have those credentials, then they're not approved to access, but it gets logged. So it's a real good way to log who's doing what when into a substation. Now, I'm not suggesting we could implement this in the 100 days, but we certainly could have a plan in place. And I think you could even then test out or implement something in a lab environment easily in 100 days, and maybe even implement it at one substation easily within 100 days. To give you an example, in 2 weeks, with a major California utility, myself and one other engineer, we implemented 5 substations within 2 weeks to do centralized access controls. Now, they had all their internet and connections operating. Their communications infrastructure was in place and operating very well. So putting in a proxy server took us approximately 2 weeks in 5 of their substations, and that was a pilot program for them. It eventually went to about 100 of their substations implementing this technology, but that took years to do 100 of them. The other thing you could do in the protection scheme is system hardening controls. And what I mean by that is look at your computer systems and determine, is the computer hardened? There are hardening guidelines out there that you can follow. They're available through NIST, and you can look at your computer system, group policies, for example, and say, okay, do I have the right group policies executed on this computer system? Now, you can audit computer systems and do this within those 20 days, in my opinion. So giving or doing a random sampling of some of the computer systems that I have and say, okay, are they within hardened specifications? Now, the word hardening is very generic. So you need to harden against a requirement or standard. And there are system guidelines for doing that are available. So I would suggest that would be another thing to consider within those 20 days. You can't do all of them. I don't want to imply you're going to do all of these all the time. I'm just picking some that these would be things I might be thinking about that I would do or consider doing. The other thing in terms of there are tools out there. This goes into the baseline and hardening. One of these tools is called WinAudit. It was free. I don't even know if it's available, but this was a great tool to use and collect information. In fact, if I were a hacker or attacker, I would have one of these things in my toolbox to try to gain access into systems, because it collects information from a computer and puts it in a really nice format. Whereas you see on the right-hand side of your screen, it gives you all the installed software, the operating system, peripherals, memory. It gives me all the devices and device drivers. It gives me the BIOS. Extremely valuable tool to collect information on a Windows computer. I don't know if there's a Linux equivalent. I think there is, and I guess I'm remiss by not having explored that for you all. But anyway, really useful tool. I like it a lot. If it's still available, I still use it today in collecting information from computer systems when I go out and do an audit. So I'm now switching to the detect phase or pillar. So when I say detect, this is a really interesting one, and this unfortunately is one I get attracted to because I'm a technocrat at heart. What I mean by technocrat is I love technology. So I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm a technocrat. That's my sense of humor here for today. I won't charge you extra for that, Steve. So what do I mean? It's really understanding and looking at what are the anomalies. One of my sons took a tracking class with the Indians down in Arizona, where he was taught to track. And one of the things they said when you're trying to track something is you have to establish a baseline. So they basically would bring out a 3-foot by 3-foot square of the area, and they say, look what's in here. And then they would take them to another square and they say, what's different about what's in this other square? And they taught them how to track based upon seeing something that was out of the ordinary or out of place. It could be a blade of grass, it could be a branch. It's not always something like a footprint. That said, that's what we're talking about in terms of anomalies. Once you understand your baseline and what traffic exists on the network, if you know what that looks like and you normalize it, you can start saying, what are the anomalies? What are the things that sort of look different? So that is the intent of an IDS system. There are a lot of IDS solutions out there, and there's some that are free, open source. There are some that are for pay. The idea is using IDS to continuously monitor to say, is something going away from baseline? Is something different here? And that's true also for configuration and change management as well. But basically identifying anomalies on my network is something that's really popular, and I'm liking what I'm seeing in this space. So in the days 41 through 60, what I might be looking at is experimenting with, hey, can I detect anomalies And am I able to understand my baseline of network traffic in a power grid or environment such as a substation? The one really interesting thing, in my opinion, about substations and microgrids, for example, is the traffic there shouldn't really change a lot in terms of what communications take place. As an example, you shouldn't see video files going through. You shouldn't see chat sessions. Well, you might, but you shouldn't. You should really only be seeing traffic that might be DMP or Modbus, and then handshaking or TCP traffic and management traffic. And that shouldn't change that much. So anomalies from the baseline from a power grid utility perspective should be something that would be easily implemented in terms of detecting anomalies. So with respect to that, here are some things you can go to the internet tonight if you wanted to and look at, or over the summer. Take a look at videos on Security Onion or Splunk. Security Onion is a great set of tools. They have some great videos to say, hey, how do you detect anomalies? Another one to look at is Snort. One of the first times I ever did deep packet inspection and looking for malformed packets as a test case here in the labs here at SEL was I was creating malformed Modbus packets, and I was using Snort to say, okay, when will it detect that there's a malformed packet versus normal packets? Really, frankly, fairly easy to do, something fun to do for me. They've advanced it well beyond what Snort and that deep packet inspection can do with Security Onion. Splunk is a way of just collecting event reports and displaying them in a dashboard format. You've got software tools that are again for pay from the Dragos and Nozomi. I'm showing a screen here from Dragos, and I'm going to show another screen from Dragos in just a second. But Dragos is a really interesting company. It's headed up by Rob Lee, who's an incredible gentleman who's worked in the industry, the cybersecurity industry for years and at very high levels of the government, and has created a company for doing intrusion detection based upon changes of behavior. So now it's more than just when something changes as an anomaly on the network. What Robert Lee has done with Dragos is saying, we're not just looking at anomalies. What we're also looking for is a change in the behavior of a system. So it's not just one thing, it's multiple things that change. And that behavior, he says, and I've seen it to be true, the changes of behavior actually can be identified back to a threat actor. Very interesting thing to look at. Look at some of his videos, and I'd say he's one of the more advanced person and companies with respect to IDS. Zeek and Bros an open source system. It looks at network traffic and again looks for the unusual. Some of the things I've tried to look at with respect to some of our IDS solutions is looking for network traffic that says, hey, I'm looking for passwords, or a number of failed logon failed connection attempts. So with respect to anomalies, what behaviors would I look at? These were some of the ones I would be looking for. Is someone trying to scan my network? Are there a number of connections that are going from one host to the next host to the next host? Those are indicative potentially of an attack that's pending. So how do you know your IDS is working? So that was one of the questions. By the way, I've asked this of Dragos themselves, and we're working through this. That is, how do you attack yourself, and do your systems, do your IDS systems notify you? So one of the things about putting in these systems, and this would take more than 20 days probably, but I'm suggesting once you put in some IDS systems, how do you know it's even working? So you need to get to know your IDS and how it behaves under certain attacks. So I would say attack yourself. So this, by the way, is a fun thing to do. I guess if you're into cybersecurity like I am, I love looking at this. So I've used on our Dragos systems here and our IDS systems here. I've used Nessus, Nmap, Metasploit. I've even injected malformed packets. And if you're wondering what tool would you use to create a malformed Modbus packet, this tool I'm showing you on the right hand of the screen is called Ostinato. Ostinato was built by a gentleman from Google he was testing his web pages, and he created an incredible tool that basically gets you down to the packet level, and you can manipulate packets and then broadcast them out your computer to the devices under test. Don't do it on your network at school. It will definitely identify, and I would assume the security department will immediately come at you. The only thing I would warn you about on this is I've left Ostinato running overnight, and I basically cooked my Ethernet port on my computer because I forgot to turn it off. So beware, buyer beware, I guess, on this one. With respect to how do you know your IDS is working, what I'm just showing you is a Dragos indicator where we were scanning with Nmap and doing some interesting things on our computers here. And yeah, it identified some of the things we were doing. So I knew my IDS was working because I was trying to attack it. I then looked at what some of these events were that occurred. I looked at the timing. I looked to make sure that they were my computer doing it. So that's one of the ways you would be able to tell your IDS is working, is that you actually try to attack yourself. So I'm going to combine these next two, or these last 40 days, I'll say, and probably you're saying we'll never get all these other things done in the 40 days that 60 days he was just sharing. That's true. I'm just picking some ones that I'd say these are the ones I would really consider doing if I were champion to do it. I would attempt to do these things. So with respect to responding, and recovering. I'm going to cover respond in just a second, but it's really about response plans and communications and doing practice. And I'm going to speak to this, and I would say out of all the things I could do or encourage someone to do, if they've got some of their bases already covered, the response section I'm about to share is really critical. And I'd say I would definitely make sure that the companies can respond appropriately. And then I'll recover in just a second. With respect to what I mean by respond, and this is a real world example. I got a call, I won't give you the time frame, but I'll say within last half a year, I got a call, and customer says, I've been attacked by ransomware. And literally there's yelling on the phone going on in the background. And the question in my mind was, why are you calling me? I'm the device manufacturer. I'm not really who you should be talking to. And what became clear to me was this particular group was not really well trained to respond to an event. And this is unfortunately too common. So, and this is why I emphasize the respond is really critical in terms of training. You should have, or our customers should have, and this is true for your lab with Dr. Brian Johnson's lab and the teams. Let's say one of your computers in your labs shows up a screen of ransomware. Do you really know who to contact? And have you actually practiced it? So I'm just sharing you here saying these are the things you should all know and how to respond. And I say a company, who's the name, title, email for each of these things. So who's your executive team? You probably have a communications person that's dedicated to talking to the news agencies. Who is that person going to be in the throes of an event? Now, what I'm suggesting is having a response plan and practice that response plan so that you know what to do and you're not reacting like the gentleman was, or the lady was who called me. I won't say who it was. That you shouldn't be responding like that in the throes of environment. And you certainly shouldn't be calling some of the vendors, in my mind, and sharing with them that you just got a ransomware attack. What you should do is contact your executive team and have almost a laminated sheet, if you will. In the case of an emergency, what should you do? Have the names of the subject matter experts. Who's the management team? Who's the technical lead? who can actually look at it and know what's going on in the system. With respect to a ransomware attack, you or any cyber attack that's asking for a retribution payment, is the FBI and the local police. Now I say the FBI, and here's a challenge question to you all. And by the way, I'm just pretending you are the utility. So forgive me. I know you're students, and I know some of the folks are professors here. I'm just sharing this because you may graduate here and move into the workforce. So I'm pretending you're the utility, by the way. When I say the FBI, you should already have an established communication link, especially if you're working on critical infrastructure. You should already know who your FBI agent is, the local representative for the FBI, and already have his contact information in your phone. And it should be on that laminated sheet. So then the local police in general are going to be less qualified to deal with the ransomware attack. But there could be, and often is, physical things that take place, people trying to breach or break into systems physically. So they should be aware of it as well. But for the practicing, you don't need to have all these things in place. You can do a tabletop exercise where you bring your team together, someone from the executive team, someone from the technical lead, and pretend FBI person, pretend local police person, and just practice. Hey, I just noticed a ransomware notice on my computer. And then just go through the steps of, okay, now what do we do? That way, when something real happens, you at least have a better mindset, a better emotional response than what I saw happen recently with ourselves. With respect to disaster recovery, we're coming to the close on the presentation. I just wanted to share that it's important to be able to back up or have a backup of your systems. And again, planning is everything. So it's really important for us and for you to say, hey, if a machine gets wiped out, that is a HMI computer or even a relay for that matter, how easily can you get it back into service? This sounds obvious, but probably one of the most intense moments I ever had in front of a customer was with one of the largest oil producers and gas producers in the world. I was working on one of their systems that was for the power grid that was for their bringing out oil and gas out of the ground. So power in that case means money. So if electric power goes down, it's a bad day for them, bad day for me as well. And the gentleman who was, I was going through the systems, the HMI systems that were part of the larger electric power system, basically said, okay, wipe your drives. I want you to follow your own instructions and restore the computer system. I was sweating bullets because I was like, okay, I wrote this up, but I don't think I actually ever tested it. And I got through it okay. And he said to me, he said, it's amazing to me how many vendors will come in here, give us these instructions, but they never followed them. And I frankly didn't tell them that I didn't follow my own, but I got lucky in that it worked. I would suggest you as engineers, as you're going out into the workforce, that when you do these types of designs, and we really implement this in SEL, is test it yourselves. Follow your own instructions or have someone else follow those instructions and say, can you follow what I just wrote? And be prepared, because a lot of times, if you're like me, someone else reads your instructions, they will not be able to follow it like you think they could. So just be prepared for I'll say a learning event where a friend is trying to help you out, and just be accepting of that. So disaster recovery is critical, backing up systems and then practicing it, saying, okay, we're going to take one down. We're prepared for this. We're doing it in a planned way. That way, when it happens in an unplanned way, you're prepared and you've gone through it once. So with respect to all the solutions for 100 days, there's lots of opportunities. There are lots of things to choose. And I've identified some of those that I would consider. I just want to say layering in security. I'm giving some examples here, and this is mostly when I hand this off to you as a PowerPoint presentation, some things we did and implemented with other customers. So we've implemented layering in active domain directories for customers. It's actually a really popular thing. And then the most important thing that's really come to light recently is multi-factor authentication. So not just single authentication, but multi-factor authentication. This is an example customer system where they had a lot of their infrastructure in place. We were placing in things such as Splunk, Acronis, Active Directory using LDAP services. So we were able to implement this system for a customer. In terms of the amount of time this took, in terms of writing the design to actually putting it into operation, it's probably a good 60 to 80 days of work, engineering work for us to do. So it's not an easy thing to do in 20 days, but it can be done, and it's something that we've done for other customers. So that's the framework. Those are some of the areas or the pillars I would suggest taking. I realize I've been talking a lot on these things and emphasizing the point of practicing them and doing some of the basics. So, by the way, for those who are inclined over the summer, you see the Morse code below. Now, it's not just Morse code. I've encrypted. Once you've decoded the Morse code, I encrypted a special message, and it's not buy more SEL or buy more Ovaltine, as in the Christmas story. But if you want to, mail me the answer that you've been able to decrypt first things first, and I'll be glad to talk to you. The other thing is we're constantly looking for folks. So if you're a new grad, feel free to consider sending me your resume. Thank you for your time. Any questions?
Thank you, Dwight. It was a great presentation. I did check really quickly, and WinAudit is still available. You can still find it. Anyway,
Okay.
I'm going to start with my own question, which is a much higher level. And that has to do with a while ago, I had heard someone say that the internet was originally set up with a totally different technology, and that if it were redesigned, it would be done in a different way that would make it more secure. Is that really a thing? I mean, is that true?
Yeah, I would say so. It was designed. This is my opinion now. So you get my opinion for free. That and $5 gets you a Starbucks coffee. Okay, so yeah, it was designed at a time where security and information exchange was really thought, okay, we're just exchanging files from one government entity to another government entity for sharing of information. So it is true, it was not designed with the intent of being secure. So what we are seeing and what the issues you're seeing, and that's, by the way, the same true for Microsoft and the operating systems, they've escalated the security issues as time has gone on. I think, though, there are some interesting technologies in the future that could really help out. Quantum technology, quantum computing. There's even quantum teleportation of data that they really don't know what's going on in the physics side of things. But those things are being used today. There's quantum key encryption that where they encrypt the keys with quantum technology and share the keys. That's actually in place and being used today as a commercial technology for transferring large wire transfers for banks. So to answer your question, yes, it is insecure by design. It's a lot harder, to your point, to design in after the fact security. And to your point, Steve, frankly speaking, when I get asked to help out customers on designs for protection and for automation systems, I really need to be engaged early on the design versus after the fact. And if that's where you're going, Steve, you're very appropriately, you're very appropriate for bringing that up.
Right. That is where I was going with it, and I'm glad you did mention that. One other just follow on. Can you, in just again opinion futuristic, do you think eventually it'll evolve to an internet version 2, only because it's becoming pretty costly. The attacks and things like that.
I don't know if it'll be internet 2. It may be something completely different too. As I said, the quantum entanglement is really giving us some incredible advances that I can't guess what will happen in 10 years or so, or 5 to 10 years. I don't think it's going to change quickly. It could, but I don't think so. But I do think it will change. And I do think a lot of times the new technologies, there's a new breakthrough that occurs that just wows us and says, okay, well, this answers the issue of security and puts me out of a job, which I would look forward to.
That's great. Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, there was one question in the chat. I'll just read it out to you. So one of our audience members was asking, I know utility with WinFarm that left a hole in firewall for denial of service attack in 2008. I assure you no one wants to sit through the inquiry after, especially if outsourced IT contractor that left hole through firewalls was on inquisitor side. My conclusion was industrial espionage or insider attack is big threat on our blind side. In brackets, Sandra Bullock movie. Please comment.
So I do, by the way, I do concur that the insider is still a big issue. If I implied that nation states are the larger threat, that's not what I meant to imply. The insider threat is just as big as the nation state. It's just that the level of nation state sophistication of attacks is getting very, very sophisticated, and they're hiding themselves much better than they ever have been. But the insider attack will always be an issue, and it's a very difficult thing. Yes, and even in the utilities, they suspect that what happened at Metcalf. I'm not sure if you remember that, about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago now, with the Pacific Gas and Electric. Their substation had been compromised physically. Things were shot. They did a physical attack on one of the major substations. There is suspicion that it was from an insider. No one's ever been able to prove that, by the way, but there's suspicion that the person knew. They seem to have known way too much for that to have happened. So I concur. Insider attacks are still a big issue, and it's unfortunate. Good question.
Do we have any other questions? I'm going to give you a few more seconds to respond. I know there's someone out there with a question. Well,
it's all good.
It's all good. So Dwight, did you have any other slides or anything to share, about things that would interest us?
Well, you mean tonight, or just send them to you?
No. I just meant if you had anything else up your sleeve that, examples or whatever, but that's fine. No,
Well, I will say this, the amount of interest in cybersecurity over this last year has increased a lot for us. The other thing I've seen, and you need to understand, I network with some of the brightest brains in the industry regarding critical infrastructure, cybersecurity issues. And we're all saying the same thing, that the level of sophistication of the attacks we are seeing are just ramped up. What happened in Florida with the water system, this was the supply water system where someone got into the PLC and increased the content of lye. into the water system to a level that would have basically, had it gone through, would have killed people. I talked to a ex-FBI person and said, basically that person was attempting murder, so they should be charged with attempting murder, correct? And he said, absolutely. That that person who was trying to do that was attempting to murder a large portion of the population. So the I'll almost call it the diabolical nature of what people are attempting to do is just gone to a level I've not seen before. And both myself and the rest of the cyber community that I'm in touch with are really very concerned, and to the point that we're very much saying you've got to start taking this seriously and doing it now. I'm not so sure that we're not so far behind in terms of taking action that some event could happen that it'll be catastrophic. I really hope not, but we're behind the 8 ball on this one, if you ask me.
Do you think it's nation states they're doing a lot of this? Only because they'd have the motivation.
Yeah, so we're definitely seeing more nation states engaged at a much more sophisticated level. Here's an interesting thing, and this was a talk by Rob Lee at Dragos in a conversation. We were asking, or we're talking about, let's say we see an attack occur and you are investigating it. And a lot of times when I go to a customer to investigate an attack post facto, they often will want attribution. Okay, who's done this? And frankly, it's a natural inclination to say, if someone breaks into your home, you want to say, okay, who did this? And you start looking at your neighbors, you start looking at the person walking down the street and saying, oh, you suspect them, because it's just human nature to want to know who did this. It's extremely difficult to attribute to any particular organization, and it takes a long time to attribute an activity that occurred to a particular group. So a lot of times a utility or a critical, an industrial complex really isn't going to have the money nor the patience that's going to be required to give attribution of an attack to a specific person or group. So one of the things I would suggest in terms of this group here that's listening to this is that if you are trying to figure out what happened, you're not most likely going to be able to figure out who did it as much as you want to. You're really going to have to focus on remediating and getting back to normal. And you're going to have to let the question go as to who did it. And that's unfortunate, but that's just one of the realities of dealing with the nation states and what's happening today. So it's attribution is going to be something that's going to take a very long time and is very expensive to do in terms of getting to that level. And frankly, there's not very many people who are going to be able to do that other than maybe the US government.
Very good. Thanks. Do we have any other questions? It's your final chance. All right. Well, Dwight, thanks so much. I really appreciate you contributing to our microgrids webinar series. This has been fascinating. My guess is we're going to invite you back more often, only because this topic changes.
Yeah,
often.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you
Definitely.
very much. I appreciate
All
that.
right. All right. Well, thanks to everyone who attended. And again, if you're interested in joining IEEE, please reach out to any of us or go to the website. Thanks.